G'day and welcome to another gun review video on my channel. If you look at my previous video, I looked at the history of Sportco, which has been Australia's only real largest scale private firearms manufacturer. Of course, we've got the Lithgow small arms factory in Lithgow, which was government owned and is now privately owned by Talis, a French company. But they're mainly looking at military firearms, whereas Sportco, as its name says, was basically a sporting arms company. In the last video I looked at some of Sportco's more popular products that they made. Sportco are now defunct, they finished back in the 80s, but there's still a lot of Sportco rifles especially around here in Australia. But this one is one that's very widely known here in Australia, but may not be quite so widely known overseas. So I just recently got this one, so I thought I'd do a review of it. So this is the Sportco. Now you may also see it called the Omark Model 44, either the Sportco Model 44 or the Omark Model 44, or the Sportco / Omark Model 44, because both of them are correct really. The reason that, because of the different names, is Sportco was actually bought by the American Omark Corporation prior to this rifle's design. So it was actually Sportco under Omark's ownership who actually developed this rifle, and they initially called them Sportco, but later on they rebranded them to Omark Model 44s because these continued to be made right after Sportco finished. These were actually designed as a full bore target rifle, so designed for aperture sights. You can see it's got a tunnel sight, you'll see in a minute, for open sight, long range, full bore shooting. But that sport has really been taken over by much more modern firearms, which is why that these have become kind of obsolete in that sport. But they're still widely used both for beginners in that sport and also for other shooting sports. Now, I don't do full bore, I've never done full bore. I'm more of a general sports and possibly vintage military rifle shooter. So in my style of shooting, an accurate, long range rifle like this really needs to be scoped. So that's what I've done with this. So the Sportco Model 44 was never designed to be scoped. So when you're looking at the rifle, just be aware that the scope, picatinny rail and the scope are aftermarket accessories that I've added on, and I will talk about the process of going through that shortly. But first of all, we'll just look at the rifle. Let's just look at the rifle itself for a second. Now, when I show you the rifle, you'll see the front tunnel sight. You can't see it at the moment because it's over there. But these rifles actually generally came with a selection of aperture sights. Now, there was one called a central sight, which is an Australian made one. I'm not an expert in this sort of shooting, and I don't know much about these sights, so I'm not going to go into them very much. I'm just mentioning them. So the central sight was a common model that was actually put on these. Other people, there was Parker Hale versions, there was Unschutz versions, I think, which were fitted to them for shooting. But I bought this rifle at auction, I didn't get a rear sight with it. And I'm not going to bother going out and finding one because the chance of me actually shooting long range with an aperture sight isn't very great. Sniper style shoots, fly shoots and bench rest type shoots out to 500 metres, because those are the type of shooting that I'm likely to use it in. And I already have actually, and you'll see at the end of the video I've got a few photos and a little bit of footage of. So I haven't used this very much, but it's actually been quite successful. What we'll do, I think, first is we will just talk about the development of the rifle, and then we will take a bit of a closer look at it. I'll talk about the process of putting the scope on it, and then at the end of the video, as I said, I've got a little bit of both footage and photos of some targets that I shot. So the rifle was, again, I won't go into the full details, there's actually quite a bit of information, but in a nutshell, Sportco saw a market for these rifles, because back in the kind of early 60s, full bore shooting was basically being done by sporterized, or accurized, more better word actually, not sporterized, accurized military rifles. So mainly number 4 Lee Enfields and number 1 Mark IIIs. Lithgow actually made heavy barrels for those rifles. I've actually got an SMLE with a heavy barrel on it. They weren't super heavy, they weren't as heavy as this one, but they were heavier than your standard military barrel. So people were setting up those rifles with heavy barrels and fancy aperture sights and shooting them out to multiple 100 metres, but they're not the most accurate rifles, those, and you know, that's not what they're designed for initially. So Sportco saw a market for a rifle like that. So in association with the South Australian, was it full bore? I can't remember what it was. I'll put it up on the screen. They talked to some of the prominent full bore shooters about what they would require in a rifle, and they got that feedback. They designed some prototypes. They you know, lent them to these target shooters to take out on the range. They shot them in competition. They made suggestions about, you know, where they could improve them.
Here's an advertisement from Omark from 1967 where they're talking about the upcoming introduction of the rifle.
Then the rifle was designed and marketed and sold. So what have we got here? Basically, we've got a bolt action, single shot only. Notice there's no magazine, and you'll see when you look closer, very big stiff action. So not having the cut out at the bottom makes the action stiffer, and bolt action, quite a heavy barrel, or very heavy barrel. You know, here where it comes out from the woodwork is probably only a bit less than an inch, probably 7/8, something like that. Not that much going on. There is a safety. The one you'll see that this safety in this one doesn't work. I mean, they probably had to put a safety on there for export safety kind of purposes. I mean, you don't need a safety on this type of rifle. No one's ever going to use it, but they probably just had to put it on. And apparently most people just took them off. Stock is 2 parts, a military style stock. Now, generally military rifles, this is the top handguard's to stop you burning your hand on the barrel during, you know, battle. Obviously in a target rifle you're not going to be shooting that quickly, and the big heavy barrel's not going to get that hot. But it probably is like these full bore shooters, you'll see they wear the big coats and they have the shooting gloves, and I think the actual handguard's more so that when you've got your gloves on you can get a grip of the rifle, you know, when you're in the prone kind of position. But maybe some experienced full bore shooters can comment on that, but that's what I would assume. And you'll see, I'll talk about it in a short while, there was a later model of the Model 44 where they got rid of the top handguard, so they obviously decided it wasn't required. The bolt is, I can just remove the bolt, again I'll show you close up, but the bolt is a 3-lug bolt. And the design of the rifle is a bit unusual in that the actual barrel is pressed into the receiver, and it's the actual extension of the barrel in here that actually contains the recesses that the 3 locking lugs go into. I've got a photo of the end of the barrel, of a barrel. I'll just show you what it looks like with the barrel taken out. You know, that makes it a very strong kind of action, but it actually makes it a little bit complicated. It's fine when the rifles are new, but when people wanted to replace the barrels or put alternative barrel and all that, you couldn't just buy a barrel and screw it in like you could into a normal action. So a lot of the prominent gunsmiths back in the day, what they used to do was either, if they had one of these barrels that you know, was surplus, it was shot out or whatever, they would pull it out and just cut it off so that they had the recesses, and then they'd screw the new barrel into the barrel, the end of the barrel from the original barrel. So you still had the bit where the locking lugs went in, connected to the end of the new barrel. Later on, I think some of the gunsmiths actually started machining, you know, actually making these little, what do you call them? barrel extensions with the locking recesses in them.
Here's a TSE made one.
So that people who are, had these actions, who were, wanted to fit new barrels, they could just buy a new barrel, some high quality target barrel, and then just, use one of these little extensions and then, headspace it to the bolt. Now, what we're talking about, the bolt and the locking and all that, there's one thing I really need to mention. The bolt has the main bolt body, and there's a bolt extension which is actually held by a pin. Now, it was found that the early pins were they were smaller and they were not strong enough, and sometimes they would actually shear off. Alright, so let's take a closer look at this bolt. So as you can see, you've got a plunger ejector there, bolt face sized for the 7.62 cartridge, triple locking lugs. We've got a spring extractor there, claw extractor. Now, if we look at this pin here, you can see we've got a big diameter end of a pin there. Turn it around. We've got a small diameter end of a pin there, and then there's actually a gas port there, for venting gas vent. I'll show you a photo of the old and the new pin sizes so you can kind of compare them.
On the right here we have one of the original pins in an early Sportco rifle. You can see how thin the end of it is. That pin is 0.1215 in diameter, the thin end. And on the left we have a replacement pin, which were also put in once they sorted the problem out. They started putting them in the rifles from the factory. The end of that pin is 0.2175 inches.
Now, apparently there was actually 3 types of pins. In the very first rifles I read from someone on the net who seemed to know what they were talking about, where that pin end is then now was a gas port, and the pin only went part way through the head, and they left that port open for gas venting. But then when they had problems with broken pins, they redesigned the pin to come all the way through the gas port, and then they drilled another gas port behind it. But then they found that the pins were still breaking with the small end, so they had to actually put bigger pins in. So if you've got a Model 44 rifle, it's important that you just check your pin and make sure. I doubt very much whether there's probably any at all rifles left in Australia that didn't have the pin replaced. And of course later on the factory just started making them with a big pin. If anyone who gets a new buys a Model 44 rifle should check it. Now, the way to check it is look at the pin end next to the gas port. If it was an original pin that hasn't been replaced, it will be about 3.1 millimeters in diameter. If it has been replaced, it'll be about 5.5. In Imperial, that's 0.1215 inches for the small original pins and 0.2175 inches for replacement pins, or the newer design of pin. So as you can imagine, if you're in the middle of a shoot and you went to lift the bolt and this pin sheared off, it would leave, the bolt would open and leave the bolt head, in the mortises. That would be annoying. But what would be even worse is if the bolt was almost sheared off, you put a cartridge in, went to close the bolt, and of course the bolt handle goes down, so you assume that the locking lugs have gone into their mortises, but in fact what's happened is the pin is sheared and left the locking lugs not locked, but the bolt is closed and ready to fire. And then if you fire, you've got the full pressure of the cartridge against an unlocked bolt, which would be catastrophic. So I'm not sure if that ever happened, because it would probably be fatal, I'd imagine, if it did. But yes, that's why they had to modify this pin. The early models of the rifle, like this one's actually made, from what I can gather looking at serial number things, apparently the serial numbers are a bit all over the place. This one's DB056. Apparently the early ones were DB and then a number. They were made in kind of 68, 69. So I was reading a thing, and I think from what I work out, they were first made in, they were developed in 67, I think they were first made in 68, and I'm pretty sure this one is a 69 model, so it's an early, it's the original, completely original design. Now this one you'll see, I'll show you the marking in a minute.
The final iteration of the M44 produced by Omark, I think was probably late 70s, early 80s. They called it the Model 44D, and there was a few other modifications to the rifle, which if you're interested you can actually read this article. This is my rifle. As you can see, it says Sportco Model 44 made in Australia. And here's a later one which says made in Australia by Omark, and note that the serial number now has a prefix of S in front of the DM. These later rifles with the S prefix had a few modifications, including not having the top handguard anymore. And a little bit later, still starting from SDU serial number, they just said Model 44 made in Australia by Omark with no mention of Sportco.
These are actually marked 7.62 caliber because the chamber it's actually cut to the military cartridge. There's actually some subtle differences apparently between, you know, a 7.62 NATO chamber designed for military ball ammo and a 308 Winchester sporting chamber. I mean, I think to all intents and purposes it makes no difference when you're just a sports shooter, so clearly I just use 308 cases. There was a barrel maker in Brisbane called MAB Barrels. It was actually named after the guy's name, but do you think, I've read that, you know, I've read his name, but do you think I can find his name on the net now? But it was like Malcolm something, you know, starting with a B. MAB Barrels, and apparently he was he was into full bore rifles, and he actually made these extensions. The other thing that they did with these rifles is people, when the 5.56 came in, people wanted to kind of get these in 5.56, so they would you know, make barrel extensions, put barrel extensions, and then put 5.56 barrels, and they'd make new bolt heads with a smaller recess, and rechamber them in 5.56. Now this MAB Barrels, he was doing the rebarreling. He was making these chamber inserts, so he's a bit of an expert on these rifles. When Omark closed down the Sportco production, they actually sold the rights to make the rifle. I think this was in about 84, and they actually continued to actually produce the rifle, the complete rifle, for a fairly short time, I think just a year or two, in their facility. So I'd imagine that the actual markings on the rifle are going to be different. It's obviously not going to say Sportco or Omark on there, but I've actually had a look to see if I could find one of these rifles and the markings on it on the net, and I haven't been able to find it. So MAB Barrels is no longer owned by the original guy, but it's got new owners, and they actually changed their name, I'm not exactly sure when, to TSE, Total Solutions Engineering. And that's still what they're called today, and they're still highly regarded barrel makers and general firearms engineers. So I live in the Sunshine Coast. I live north of Brisbane. So when I got my rifle and I decided I needed to have it set up for a scope, I just gave them a ring and said, you know, what can you do for that? So they said send it down, so I just took it out of the wood and just sent the barrel action down. And they actually custom design, well, I'd say it's off the shelf thing, but as you can see, they fit this. This is a 20 MOA picatinny rail, which means that it actually is angled this way, so that gives an extra 20 MOA of elevation for long range shooting, so you don't run out of elevation. As I said, I'm not an expert long range shooter, but that was something that was recommended. As you can see, they've nicely machined it so it fits, you know, fits the ejection port. So they did a really good job of fitting the Picatinny rail. So if you've got something that needs a rail put on, or especially one of these, I would recommend sending it to them. And I'll put their details down. I mean, you'll be able to find them by Googling anyway, but I'll put their details down in the description. As far as the scope goes, I mean, anyone who knows about scoped rifle shooting knows that you get what you pay for. Really, if you're really serious about highly accurate shooting at long range, you need to spend, probably $1,500 or $2,000 on a scope. But this rifle only cost me $400, so I wasn't going to go out of the, too overboard. So I just got a Nico Sterling Diamond FFP, which is first focal plane scope. It's a 34mm tube, so the thicker the tube, the more range of elevation you're going to have. So, because the range I shoot at now only goes out to 500, but you never know. At some stage in the future, I might get a chance to go somewhere where we're shooting right out, to 1,000 metres or whatever. I'd like to have a go at doing that. So I thought, well, I'll set it up so that it actually will do that. But it's a fairly cheap scope. It was like $380 or something. So optical quality certainly is not as much as a Leopold or a German scope, but it does all right.
And I forgot to mention that I naturally mounted the scope in a set of worn rings. Now, if you're wondering why that would be what I naturally do, you'll need to go and check out my previous video about the history of Sportco. Alright, now let's just have a bit of a look at this rifle. So let's just give you a general overview of it. So as you can see, simple bolt action rifle, wooden stock with a half-length handguard, held on by a band, and we haven't got any open rear sight on there, but we'll have a look at the front sight in a second. We've got a steel trigger plate, and then you'll see that there's a sling loop part way down. That's to use one of these shooting slings, which I'm not really that familiar with using, so I won't go into that too much. Connected to the front and the center of the rifle to put weight on the rifle when you're shooting. To dismantle the rifle, I've obviously dismantled it to send the barreled action away. You basically take out this screw here, which goes up into the tang. This screw here goes up into the action. That's loose on there, but the screw is tight into the action. So those are the two action screws, and then this simply is just a band around the fore end. And if we go to the other side of the rifle, so yeah, not much else going on this side. So we've got this serrated plate, which is the sight plate, designed for the sight to go on. And the sights, if you look at the sights, where they go on, they have a plate with the same serration. So the sight's actually, as it's screwed in, it's kept in the same spot all the time. So it can be taken on and off and still retain at zero. But if you look at the butt plate, it's Omark Australia Limited Sportco. So there you go. So it's got both the brands on the butt plate right from this very early rifle. So we've got a 26-inch, fairly heavy barrel. So there's the bolt release there. I can see now it's actually got a little bit of knurling on it, so it's designed to be pushed inwards. So pull the bolt out, and you should be able to, where is it there? Get your thumb on there. Just push that in. There we go. And that releases the bolt. And then at the front we've got, it actually says on there Parker Hale, I think it says, doesn't it? Yeah, so we've got a Parker Hale. So you can see it seems to be held on by a dovetail. It looks like someone's actually pinned the front of this sight, maybe to tighten it up or something. But I think you undo that knob and it will actually come off the dovetail. Inserts, you can see it's just got a post insert at the moment. According to a post I read from someone who seems to be quite an expert on these, there was actually 3 types of barrels available during their period of manufacture. In the early rifles with the full wood like mine, or the full handguard like mine, the barrels were 1 in 12 twist, what was called the original light barrel. They changed to an intermediate weight barrel, slightly heavier than this one apparently, which had a 1 in 13 twist, and this was marked over the chamber. And then the final MAB rifles had a bull barrel, which was a 1 in 14 twist. So they had reasonably slow twists, these rifles, I think. They were designed to shoot the 144 grain military load, L2A2 military load at the time. Alright, so I just got 4 sheets of paper here. It's a bit hard to do this with camera, but let's see. So there we go, so that goes right up there to just basically in front of the chamber. So well and truly full length floated there. Right, now we're on this side of the rifle. I just noted that the safety actually has a green little indent and a red indent. So presumably that would be safe and that would be fire. There was really no requirement for a safety in a full bore target rifle, but Sportco obviously felt that they had to put one on. So almost everyone just removed these internal parts to make the safety non-functional. That's why mine just flops back and forth without actually doing anything. In the later models, they actually got rid of the safety. The trigger in the M44 was fully adjustable for weight, trigger weight, sear engagement, and also over travel. Here's an article from a contemporary shooting magazine talking about how to safely adjust the trigger on the M44. So that's the history and the description of the rifle. It's a fairly simple rifle, there's not too much to tell you. But the thing with a rifle like this is how well does it shoot? That's what we wanted to know. That was what I was interested in knowing. Of course, I didn't shoot it at all until it mounted the scope, so I didn't have any sights. So I took it out and sighted in 100 metres, and must say I was rather impressed with how well it shot. And since then I've actually done a 100 metre and a 200 metre bench rest, and then the last time I took it out I did a 300 metre fly shoot, and then we took it out to 500 metres and I shot it at that. So I've got a bit of footage and a few photos of the targets. I didn't bother filming me shooting this rifle because it's just a single shot bench rest, it's not very exciting. So let's go and have a look at those targets and see how I went. I loaded up some cartridges, 100 cartridges, using Aussie-made ADI 308 Winchester cases. I used Australian Defence Industries AR2206 powder. This was developed in 1979 for the new F4 7.62 cartridge. It's now obsolete, it's been replaced by a very similar powder, but I've got quite a large quantity of this, so I used this. Projectiles were 155 grain hollow point boat tail Sierra Match Kings. I used Federal large rifle primers. Powder charge was taken from a 2000 edition of ADI's reloading manual, and it was 44.5 grains. I didn't do any load development, I just loaded them all up at 44.5 grains and overall length at the standard SAMI specifications. So we're just going up to have a look at the target for this 100 metre bench rest match. It's a bit windy today, there's probably a 15 or 20 knot gusting wind. So here's my sighted target. That was the very first shot, so again there was probably oil in the barrel. I don't generally bother putting brush through before I start. And then I fired these 2 shots, which I was pretty happy with, so I just didn't do any adjustment and I went back to this target. And so I think maybe this here was my first shot, and then we did these 4 and then that one. I think this was my first shot here, and then it went across, did these, that one. So I think this group here was my first 5, so that's probably a bit less than an inch. And then after that the barrel may have been getting a bit hot. I shot it fairly quickly because there was only 2 of us left, and 2 in the second detail, so I didn't want to hold everyone up. So I probably shot all of these in 5 or 6 minutes. I think we've got a bit of barrel heating, we're stringing up here. So 2, 3, 4. 5, yeah. So I think the shots were 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Actually, I think it was 9, 10. This is a bench rest match at 200 metres. Alright, so this is a sighted target, this one on the left. So I've never fired this rifle at 200, so I'd put the scope up 10 clicks, which was what I calculated it should be. But then my first shot was way up here. So then I put it back down the 10 clicks to where it was at 100. And that was this one here. So then I put it back up 4 clicks, I think. And that brought us up to here. And then I put it down 1 more click before I went over here. So these were my first shots. I think actually one of these two was my first, but then I started aiming over here, so it's obviously going a fair way to the left. And well, actually first of all I was aiming about here and I got those, so then I started aiming over here. My last 4 shots were these 4 here. This is a 5-shot bench rest fly shoot at 300 metres. This is my sighting target. And this is my scoring target. I'm sorry, it's a little bit out of focus, but you can see I almost hit the fly. The targets are scored and then you get a bonus for actually hitting the fly. Now we're out at 500 metres. The optical quality of the scope was starting to actually have a bit of an effect at this point, and also there was a fair bit of mirage actually on a warm sunny day. But this is my sighting target. With 4 scoring shots, I actually did better than everybody else with this one. And this is my scoring target. Again, with 4 scoring shots, I was the only one with 4 scoring shots, and I actually won the event. Well, that brings us to the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you're a keen shooter and you live in Australia, well, you probably might want to go and find yourself one of these. There's heaps of them out there. There's always, at any given time, there will be probably a dozen on various gun shop websites and used guns, various websites on the net. They vary from ones like this, which are in, traditional early ones, all unmolested, right through to there's even ones in sort of aluminium chassis and, like really super modern ones. And everything in between. You might want to get one and try big bore, with a big bore shooting with the original sights, or do what I did and mount a scope and just do some bench rest, fly shoots, that sort of thing. Ton of fun. If you live in New Zealand or Canada, you apparently, from what I can gather, there's a few of them around over there as well, so you might find one. But if you live in the US, you're very unlikely to be able to find one of these. Apparently there is a few of them over there that have been privately imported over the years. You'd probably just find this video interesting in general if it's something you haven't seen before. And if that's the case, stay tuned, because next video is about an American gun, a very popular one at that. So I think you'll enjoy that. So until next time, thanks for watching.